Blessings, everyone. This is Reverend Aphren with the Folklore Temple. I'm coming to you today because I want to talk a little bit about the difference between mythology, folklore, and legends. So I decided to come to a place that I think is really special. So I apologize if it is a bit loud. I'm pretty close to a stream right now. It's absolutely gorgeous out today. It's almost about mid-60s, mid to upper 60s. And I'm repping my family and tradition. So I'm going to turn the camera around so you can kind of see. I guess I can't turn this around once I get started. Oh well. Okay. So, yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between those three. So most of us have heard the story of myth. You know, what exactly is a myth? A myth is a story about the gods, and it's a story about humans and how they interact with the gods. So a lot of the information that we have and that we as Wiccans and pagans care about is from mythology, because it gives us some understanding about who these deities are, what they like, what they don't like, and how we can worship them. Secondly is legends or sagas. Now, legends or sagas sometimes are fantastical in the way that they may be told. So they may have elements of, the gods being involved, or elements of, magical creatures or what have you. But generally they are rooted in history. So when you talk about sagas, you talk about legends, you find that these people were historical people that existed at a particular time in history, and they had the opportunity to do things that we can read about and learn from. So of course, if you think about the Nordic tradition and all the sagas and things that go along with that, you find a lot there, and you find a lot in the experiences that those people have. Now, finally, there is folklore. Now, folklore, I would consider folklore to be a little bit more local. So whereas you might have stories of the gods that happen sort of all over town or all over the country, all over the world, folklore is kind of located in a very specific place, a very local sort of down-to-earth kind of place. There is a difference between folklore and fairy tales. Folklore deals specifically with stories. They can be fantastical or they cannot be fantastical. A lot of times these folklore and fairy tales are meant to be for entertainment. So you find a lot of times these folk tales and things are all about how to entertain the people. Fairy tales are more so for children, but they can also be for adults as well, because a lot of times fairy tales have a sort of a story behind them, or they have a sort of message or moral to that story. So when you learn about them, not only are they entertaining, but they also are teaching you a lesson at the same time. So those are the three main parts of mythology, folklore, fairy tales, legends, and all that. Again, legends are normally involving people. So I would say, even things like, Johnny Appleseed, or even stories about Gerald Gardner or Raymond Buckland or some of our elders, those could be considered to be legends, even though they are true. Most of the time they are true. Obviously, we weren't there, so we can't really say exactly if everything that's been brought down to us is true. But they are legends and things that have to do with people that existed in history. Now, in addition to mythology being about the gods, a lot of times people want to challenge mythology and say, well, it's not real, it doesn't have to deal with real people, they're just made up stories. Mythology is true. All mythology is true. Our understanding of the word true is where the delusion comes from. Because when we think of true, we think of something that exists in a physical time, physical place. Historically, we can track it, we can whatever. Mythology is true in its own way. Mythology is true in a universal way. Not all stories can be mythology because they don't have the elements that mythology needs in order for it to be mythology. So yeah, it's stories about gods, but it's also stories about the universe. It's also stories about creation. It's also stories about the way that things work, or the way that the ancestors believed or saw physically with their own eyes how things work. And so mythology is true in so much that the stories about the gods help us to understand the universe and help us to understand maybe the meaning behind the things that we're seeing in the universe. And I think that whether it's historically true or whether it's physically true or factual is really not what matters. Because at the end of the day, what we do is we take these stories, we take these myths about the gods, and we put them into our own lives, and we give our lives context, and we give our lives purpose, and we give our lives meaning. So regardless if they are physically true, regardless if we have empirical evidence to support a mythical claim or not, that's okay, because again, at the end of the day, it's true, and it's true to the people who believe it, and it's true to the lives of the people who believe it. So, kind of is what it is. So I came here to this place because I wanted to show you this. Um, this makes me think back to the myth of Diana and her nymphs and the hunter Actaeon. Um, this just kind of reminds me of Diana's pool, where her and her nymphs were sort of sitting around the pool and enjoying the water, and then they were discovered by the hunter Actaeon, and Actaeon, it was a complete mistake for him to come upon them, and he did apologize to them for seeing them unclothed, bathing privately in Diana's sacred spring, and of course, Diana, or Artemis, in her rage, turned him into a deer, and his own hounds chased him down and devoured him. But this very place reminds me a lot of Diana's pool. And I often imagine that if the Four Pillars ever hosted lustration, that I would come here to what I am now calling the Pool of Diana, or Artemis, to get the lustral water for lustration. So you have to understand that, again, mythology is real in its own way, and we have the opportunity to take that mythology and apply it to our lives and learn the lessons that the stories are teaching us and learn the lessons that the gods are teaching us. And I've talked in previous videos about the idea of dhikr, which is an Arabic term essentially meaning remembrance. And when we practice remembrance, we are constantly reminded of the presence of the divine, or sort of the stories of the divine. And for me, reading the stories of mythology helps to allow me to remember things. Remember the stories. Excuse me. Remember how the gods interact with us and how we should treat the gods. And it makes me just put myself again sort of into that mythical time where I can be present with the gods in their story, in their experience. And so for some people, reciting the name of a deity may be their way of remembrance. I think for pagans and Wiccans, our way of remembrance should be to reread their stories, reread our teachings, and reread those messages to help us to understand our place in the universe, the importance of our lives, and what it means to be human, and what it means to relate to the experiences of the world. As you can see behind me here, this is the lower part of the pool of Diana. But up there is where the main part of the pool was in the previous segment. So thanks for coming on this little walk with me, everyone, and enjoying the beautiful day that we have here in northeastern Ohio, and seeing one of my favorite places on earth. It's called the Green Cathedral, and I'm sure you can see why from the beautiful footage I've shown. So thank you so much for coming and watching this video. Until next time, signing off for now.